Hello there, welcome back to my little channel on the Viking Age and Norse mythology mostly, but I also discuss other topics. And today I am going to try to give my 2 cents on a very controversial matter that has been firing up spirits online and offline ever since it was announced. And I am talking about the new Netflix docudrama about Cleopatra. So a little bit about me first. So I'm Irina. I have a PhD in Viking Studies and a master's degree in ancient cultures with a focus on late antiquity and the early Middle Ages. But I know a thing or two about other stuff as well because, that's what historians are supposed to do. All right, more about me in the description. Now let's get to the matter. So, I think it's due to be launched in May on the 10th. It's very new and it's very controversial, and Egyptians themselves are not really thrilled about it. Zahi Hawass, for example, he's the former Minister of Antiquities. You probably know him because he's all over the place in all these documentaries about ancient Egypt. He stated, and I quote here, that Netflix is trying to provoke confusion by spreading false and deceptive facts that the origin of the Egyptian civilization is black. And that's not the only thing he did. He also called on Egyptians to take a stand against Netflix, to block access to Netflix services in Egypt. He said that the series included visual material and content that violated Egypt's media laws and accused the streaming channel of trying to, I quote here again, promote the Afrocentric thinking, which includes slogans and writings aimed at distorting and erasing the Egyptian identity. And on Sunday, a lawyer actually filed a complaint with the public prosecutor demanding that he take the necessary legal measures to block Netflix. Right, so what is going on here? Well, to sum it up from the beginning, I think there is a potential conflict between ancient Cleopatra and modern Cleopatra. So Cleopatra VII, the last queen of Egypt and a woman of great ability who influenced Roman politics in an absolutely critical moment, is subjected or has been subjected throughout the ages to, let's say, a form of racial profiling, I guess. As people nowadays tend to be very, very interested in what she looked like, her racial background in particular, than her many accomplishments and, the fact that she tried by her actions to save the kingdom, or at least to preserve it in one form or the other. So the person is not as interesting as her race. All right, let's talk a little bit about whether she was black or not, because I think that's the question most people are asking here. And then let's discuss about whether this truly is important or not. So, to be blunt from the beginning, there isn't really evidence that she was black, yet it is one of those issues that seems to take a life of its own as a topic. There is all indication to the contrary, actually. So she was born in 69 BC. She is the descendant of a line of Egyptian kings in a dynasty that went back 250 years. Her ancestor was Ptolemy I, and Ptolemy I was a companion of Alexander the Great. He founded a dynasty in the late 4th century BC, and he was Macedonian Greek in origin. So he actually grew up at the court of Alexander the Great's father, Philip, Pella in Macedonia, so the northern part of the Greek peninsula. Then he established himself as king of Egypt, following the very troubled years after Alexander the Great's death, the fights among his generals, the so-called Diadochi. Then the descent passed through 6 successor Ptolemies until it reached Cleopatra's father. So she was basically about 8 generations away from being Macedonian Greek. So for the first 6 generations, the wives of the Ptolemies also came from the same Macedonian background. So that's to say that until the time of her great-grandfather, the ethnic makeup was mostly Macedonian Greek. And I think some of her ancestors also married their sisters, so yeah, they pretty much reinforced this ethnicity. With her grandfather, there are some uncertainties because he had two wives of Macedonian background, yet he seems to have had at least one other concubine of uncertain origin. Maybe she was Egyptian. So by the time of Cleopatra's grandparents, so to speak, there might have also been an Egyptian element in the racial stem. Talking about Cleopatra's father, he also had several wives. One was his sister, but there is evidence that he also had children with another mother. The geographer Strabo, on the other hand, one of the few contemporary sources about Cleopatra, for the life of Cleopatra, he wrote that these wives and concubines, on the other hand, were all of significant status. So they might have not been concubines at all, but only wives, as a matter of fact. And that makes it possible that Cleopatra's mother was actually also a Macedonian Greek. If that wasn't the case, let's assume it wasn't the case, if we look for a different ethnic background, we can think of the closest group which have produced women of high social status at the time, and that would have been the Egyptian religious elite. And in fact, this elite had a history of intermarriage with the Ptolemaic dynasty. Some other matters are to be taken into consideration. Cleopatra was the only ruler of her dynasty who, apart from her language Greek, also knew the Egyptian language. This may suggest an association with an Egyptian speaker in her family, perhaps her mother. Then again, she might have just learned the language for ideological reasons, to show that she traces back her lineage to very old times. Then again, she also wanted to represent herself as Isis, so she definitely had a close connection with this more distant heritage that she wanted to promote. All right, Cleopatra's daughter became Queen of Mauritania and was ethnically mixed herself because her father was Roman. And she honored the Egyptian religious elite at the capital of Mauritanian Caesarea. And this makes sense if, let's say, they at some point had been part of her family or her extended family. And we also have, perhaps as a last argument, into this direction, that she was mostly Macedonian Greek with a probable element of Egyptian ancestry, would be her representations in Greek and Roman art. So if you look at these representations, there isn't really anything suggesting that she was anything else than Mediterranean ethnicity. So I'm pretty sure artists knew how to represent other backgrounds as well, which makes it pretty sure that she was part of this background. Now, the problem here, now that we clarified the fact that, okay, she wasn't black, the problem here is applying modern political identities to the ancient world, which is very hard, problematic, and I would say pretty much useless. That is because race in the ancient world didn't matter. People were not interested in these aspects, like at all. The color of your skin played no part whatsoever. There were other differences between people and peoples that mattered. It mattered whether you were free or unfree. It mattered whether you wielded political power or not, for example, social status, basically. That's not race. So white and black, they're not ancient categories of race or ethnicity that would have made sense in the ancient world. And again, terms such as Egyptian, Macedonian, Greek, African. They mean nowadays different things that they would have meant back in the day. Um, they invoke different political and social affiliations. Even this qualification that Cleopatra was Macedonian Greek echoes some contemporary disputes over the use of the name Macedonia. So when we perpetuate this idea that her family tree points out her Greekness or her Egyptianness or Africanness, yeah, all these identification models, her race at all, we are basically perpetuating the idea that these categories of race and ethnicity are somehow patterns that are universal across time and space, and that they would have made sense regardless of time and space. Cleopatra doesn't have a race as we understand it in modern terms. So it's really hard to make any claims and to be able to identify her racial background. If you try to identify her racial background, you're automatically promoting a modern political position and a modern political preoccupation. Because, yeah, you cannot say she was half Egyptian, or she was 1/3 African, and she was pure Macedonian Greek. Because in our minds, in our contemporary minds, such things cannot be true at the same time. So what I'm trying to say here is that race isn't really a genetic truth on the one hand, and secondly, that our structured forms of identity, as we understand them nowadays, they're not applicable anytime and anywhere. So if we look, for example, at the ancient sources talking about Cleopatra, they're absolutely uninterested in that. They don't care about her identity in these ways we obsess over nowadays. So we discuss these arguments of whether she was a Greek queen, an African queen, an Egyptian queen, as if all these concepts were mutually exclusive and some kind of unique identities where one cancels the other. We also need to be honest that any casting of Cleopatra in modern contemporary cinema or documentaries will be one that conforms to some kind of modern political desire or social fantasy. Whether this fantasy is one of white antiquity or a desire for a more inclusive representation in popular media. So from this point of view, it's much easier to understand why controversy erupts every time there is a television casting on Cleopatra. So basically we have very competing visions about who Cleopatra is to us. If you look throughout history, so for the most part, the big budget productions, Hollywood productions about the life of Cleopatra have cast actresses that also conform to a certain stereotype. We have Elizabeth Taylor, we have Vivian Leigh. They were all the seductress type. So curvy figures and fashionable, with dark hair intended to represent some form of sexuality, of overt sexuality, versus the casting of a more, let's say, innocent looking female. And of course, we have the pale white skin representing this Eurocentric ideal beauty standards for women promoted throughout the entertainment industry. Now, okay, Cleopatra wasn't black, but I'm pretty sure she wasn't, for example, as white as I am, like as pale as I am, or any other, let's say white European for that matter. So then we have these lavish sets and costumes, also intended to evoke some kind of exotic or Orientalist context. The actresses always being cast from the same, let's say, Anglophone, European, American mold. So this stems from this insistence on Cleopatra's whiteness as a Macedonian Greek, yeah, not as a North African Egyptian. So this indicates that Hollywood itself has a specific image of Cleopatra that is rooted back in this early type of casting mapped onto Euro-American standards for beauty, which in their turn have their origins in Orientalist paintings and all kinds of artistic representations. There was another controversy a couple of years ago when another production was announced, casting this time Gal Gadot in the main role as Cleopatra. So Gal Gadot, you probably know her from Wonder Woman. She fits the physical type, but she breaks that type by being ostensibly from a Mediterranean country. Yeah, she's an Israeli actress. And she does have a little bit of an accent, but maybe that's not the most important part of the debate. The most important part of the debate was precisely her origin from Israel. So the claim to Mediterraneanness was part of this debate. So because it is precisely the question of the status of Israel and the Ashkenazi Jews as white settler colonizers of a Mediterranean landscape that has to do with Gal Gadot's Cleopatra. So what I mean here is that for some people, her casting was perceived as a kind of assertion of modern claims to ancient landscapes that mirror the Israeli settlements in Palestinian territories. That may not make a lot of sense for us, but it is definitely a very sensitive matter in the Near East, which is why this part of the controversy was almost ignored in US, European social media and entertainment journalism. But like I said, it does matter in the Middle East, and it does matter in Egypt in particular. So the criticism revolved around her performance of some kind of feminist empowerment, and on the other hand, her positioning regarding the treatment of Palestinians in occupied territories of Gaza, because she didn't really say in any of her public statements that she was against the policy of the Israeli government. So such a choice would situate the ancient Cleopatra as a feminist on the one hand, as Gal Gadot wanted her to be, but in the same time as an embodiment of this modern colonialist framework of Western hegemonic power over the Orient. So this is one way of interpreting it, so that you can see how controversial any casting of this character can be because of the interplay and conflict of histories and stories and backgrounds and so on and so forth. And another problem would be that it presents Egyptian history while excluding Egyptians and, by extension, Arab-speaking communities. So in this part of the world, it was perceived as a disconnection from their past. Although if you think about it, the connection between the Arab-speaking Egypt and Cleopatra's world, well, it's not really there, but in their mental imagination, in their collective imagination, it plays a tremendous part as a point of reference in their history. So it is still a big topic. It is still a big part of Egyptian identity, a sensitive topic, which is why people were also upset about the possibility of casting an Israeli actress as Cleopatra. And this is not the only example to see how big this problem is. There was also a large-scale production from recent years dedicated to the Queen that aired a couple of months ago before the outbreak of the so-called Arab Spring. It was also called Cleopatra, and it started in 2010. There were about 30 episodes, and the series was this time a joint Egyptian-Syrian production with team staff from both countries. The decision, however, was not to use Egyptian Arabic, but classical Arabic, because the series was actually not made for Egyptian audiences, despite being an Egyptian-Syrian production. The script writers and main actress were Syrian, and on the other hand, the production was funded by a Saudi media conglomerate owned by a prince, the largest entertainment group in the Arab world. It was produced by Rotana Khalicha, a TV channel airing primarily in the Gulf countries. So what was this about? Well, the Saudi production was also an appropriative project, appropriating history, trying to make history fit your own agenda. Because it was closely tied to hegemonic agendas in the region. So in this way, many Egyptians can see the Gal Gadot played Cleopatra as an Israeli appropriation of Egyptian culture. And on the other hand, you have a Saudi production, an Egyptian production, but sponsored by Saudi media entertainment, trying to promote their own agenda with expressing their hegemony in the area. So I gave you these examples so that you can see that this is not a new problem. This isn't something that Netflix decided out of the blue. It always has to do with a particular context. And the new Cleopatra appears in precisely this context of, let's say, populism and fascism and Islamophobia and anti-blackness, which have risen sharply, including in the United States. So probably the director attempted to offer this alternative presentation of Cleopatra in order to conform to problems which are relevant to us nowadays. Yeah. So this has nothing to do with what Cleopatra was in the ancient world. So what I'm trying to say here is that I don't think there is a way to turn this character neutral. No matter who are you going to cast, somebody is going to have a problem. There will be some controversy around it, and people are going to see something in her background and her color and her race, which is not appropriate, or I don't know, not pleasing enough, or problematic. I don't know. So people are not going to look at the historical character, what she did, why she was great, what her accomplishments were. So what matters is the stories told nowadays. They can be misogynistic stories, feminist stories, nationalist, Orientalizing, colonial, emotional, dramatic, whatever. But these stories told about this exceptional woman from the past, these stories are not her stories. They are our stories. And movies, entertainment, series, or docudramas, as they are called nowadays, they're always going to have this political element included. Always. And please remember that until a while ago, there were a bunch of white actors that were blackened up or made to look Asian in order to play characters from other backgrounds. And that happened, well, quite some time. Nowadays we have something called color-conscious casting. So color-conscious basically means that you have to take into account that there were also marginalized groups throughout history, and now they have this chance of making themselves noticed as actors, as producers, as directors, and so on and so forth. And you have to show that you are aware of these traditional discriminations, and by casting as many diverse people as possible, show that there is a broad range of talent that needs to be brought forward as well. So that's the main idea of it. But then again, of course, there is also the political element. Um, well, yeah, if you look throughout history, I mean, when was Jesus ever depicted as a Middle Eastern brown man throughout European art? Never. And I could give you a whole list of films where white actors used to play people of color. So it's a pretty long list. Now, I deal with the Viking Age, for example, well, most of the time. And I remember at least two examples that caught my attention. The first one was about Heimdallr. Heimdallr, played by Idris Elba in the Marvel version of Thor. And yeah, there was a complete outrage because Heimdallr was white, and it says so in the text as well. Well, first of all, in the mythological text, it is specified that he was Hvítur, which is a word indeed meaning white, but white also meant beautiful. So in Old Norse poetry, whiteness was associated with brightness, with beauty, because it was linked to the elites who did not have to spend time doing chores in the sun and getting tanned. So that was a different, yeah. But then again, I don't think, what was the problem here? You were upset about some fantasy character. I mean, I hope to God you're not going to learn about Norse mythology from Thor, the Marvel movie. They can cast whoever they want. It's a fantasy movie. Get over yourself. I mean, I tend to understand more where this controversy about Cleopatra being black comes from, because she was a historical figure. But getting upset about fantastic characters, why? And there was another controversy, a more recent one, about, I haven't seen the series because I don't really care about it, about Vikings Valhalla, where there was this Jarl Håkon, played by a black woman. Again, the internet went nuts. I also read some threads on Reddit about that, and there were some people saying that that's an insult to my culture, the fact that they cast a black woman to play a chieftain. Well, first of all, I don't understand your culture. Are we still living in the Viking Age? Number two, what kind of traits do you share with those people back then, other than, some territory you happen to occupy with a distance of 1,000 years? Now, Viking was a profession, it was, we do tend to use it as designating the whole range of Scandinavian peoples and activities between the 8th and the 11th century, but first and foremost, Viking meant a seafarer or a pirate. So the thing about Viking DNA is that it doesn't exist. It's a completely nonsensical construct. This would be one thing. And secondly, just like in the case of Heimdallr, you are overreacting over a fantasy character. Is this really the only thing that bothers you in these series? The fact that you have a black woman playing a Jarl and nothing else, because everything else is so historically accurate. So you're not bothered at all by the fact that throughout the series, Vikings have been represented as a gang of bikers. That's perfectly fine. Or that Kattegat, for example, where this black woman was chieftain, doesn't exist. Kattegat is a strait between Denmark and Sweden. There was no kingdom of Kattegat. It's a Viking fantasy. It's, it's a story. It's a made-up story. It has several historical elements, but overall, it is a fantasy. So if you get upset about these things, and other things make perfect sense to you, then you're pretty selective in what makes you angry. All right, so my other take on the topic would be, on the other hand, that what I do believe is that we need more stories of actual historical people of color, because I'm not sure whether this is the right approach in order to bring forward stories that haven't been told about great characters from traditionally marginalized groups. Because recasting the same European stories but with people of color, is that really a good strategy? Because once more, by doing that, you put aside other things that might have been a little more relevant and a little more important historically. So for that matter, I don't really find it. I have mixed feelings about it. I find these choices, well, at least I'm not as outraged about them as other people, because, like I said, if you want to learn history, you're not going to learn history from entertainment. I hope so. But on the other hand, first of all, I have a small problem with the term docudrama, because I don't know what to make of it. What is the production attempting to do? Is it attempting to be a documentary? Is it attempting to be a drama? Make up your mind. There is a big difference. Don't promote it as a documentary overall. Vikings was also promoted as a historically accurate series. A fact which I disliked so much that it prevented me from actually enjoying the series. Yeah, so this would be a thing. So decide what your production is about, what you want to do. And secondly, maybe change a little bit the strategy. You know, like show parts of history that haven't been told yet, with people who are not white, because there are so many of them. It's full of them. I don't even know them, and I would like to see such a thing, but I cannot see them because every time we try to make a change, there is also a change in the sense of, let's color some people who are also part of the traditional, Eurocentric history, but just cast them as people of color. I don't really see a point in that. I don't see a use in that, so to speak. Am I going to watch the new Cleopatra series? Well, I'm probably going to watch it because from the trailer, I noticed that they also ask questions to different archaeologists and historians. So maybe I'm going to find out something interesting from that. So, well, that's it from me. I hope I clarified some aspects, and what I wanted to show you throughout this video was the fact that some things we are very concerned about in the present days actually didn't really matter to the people from the ancient world, and maybe we shouldn't care as much about them as we want. Despite that, there is a point in doing all of this, in changing the discourse, in changing the appearance, and so on and so forth. On the other hand, we need to remember the fact that we are dealing with productions that will always have some kind of political purpose. So if you truly care about Cleopatra, don't care about her race, just read the sources about her, or read some books, some good books about her. You will find some of them in the description as well. And try not to overreact. Although I do kind of understand why Egyptians took it so hard. History is complicated, and it is especially complicated when we are trying to make something out of it which is to our taste. And it is also complicated when we take these productions, docudramas or whatever they are, too seriously. All right, If you want to share a comment or a question, please do so. And if you have other topics you would be interested in, you can write me and I will see what I can do. Check out my videos on Norse mythology and Germanic languages as well. They are less politically, you know, overshadowed, so to speak. Hope you enjoyed and have a good day.